therapist said going back might help, that confronting the past was the only way to move forward. That's the only reason I am driving down this godforsaken stretch of highway toward my childhood home, a place I swore I'd never see again, the house I inherited after my grandmother's quiet, unexplained death. The silence in the car is so heavy, I can feel it pressing against my eardrums. I keep checking the rearview mirror, but there's never anyone there, just the empty road, swallowing my taillights. And there it is, the Ellis house. It looks smaller than I remember, and yet somehow hungrier. I kill the engine, and the sudden silence is a physical shock. The last of the sunset bleeds out behind the roofline. I grab my duffel bag, the keys cold in my hand. The air smells of wet pine and deep, old earth, a smell that lives in my bones. Hey, while I am out here facing my demons, tell me in the comments what's a place from your childhood that still gives you the creeps. The key turns with a groan that echoes through the foyer. The smell hits me first, not decay, but stagnation, dust, old polish, and that faint, sweet scent of Grandma's lilac perfume, lingering like a ghost. I flick the light switch. The power company said it would be on. I use my phone's flashlight, the beam cutting a shaky path across the familiar, shrouded furniture. Everything is under sheets, just like when we left after the funeral. My beam catches the massive family portrait above the fireplace. 3 generations of Ellis women. My great-grandmother, stern and straight-backed. My grandmother, with a tight, knowing smile. And my mother, a young woman with eyes that already looked tired. My own face, as a toddler, is a blur at the edge of the frame. We never took another picture after that. I found some candles in a drawer. The soft light should be comforting, but it just makes the shadows deeper, more alive. I went to check the Landlinia relic grandma, insisted on keeping Gand, found the receiver off the hook, lying on the floor. The dial tone was a loud, monotonous scream in the quiet. I put it back. A cold draft, like a sigh, moved past me. The house was settling, I told myself. Just an old house settling. I must have dozed off on the couch, exhausted from the drive and the weight of memory. I woke to the sound of whispering. Not words, just a soft, sibilant rush, like many people talking at once in another room. I sat bolt upright, my heart a jackhammer. The whispering stopped. The candle was guttering, casting frantic shadows. I looked at the portrait. The faces were in darkness, but I could have sworn no. It was a trick of the light, just my mind playing games. The whispering started again just before dawn, and this time it seemed to come from below. The basement, a place I was forbidden from ever going as a child. The door was always locked, it stood slightly ajar. I stood at the top of the stairs, my phone's light doing nothing to penetrate the blackness. A cold, damp smell wafted up moss, stone, and something metallic. I took a step down. The wood creaked like a warning. The basement was a time capsule. Old tools, broken furniture, and rows upon rows of shelves lined with mason jars. I moved my light over them. At first, I thought they were pickles or preserves. Then I looked closer. The shapes inside, they were wrong. Twisted root-like, some with hints of fibrous, hair-like strands. They seemed to pulse faintly in the light. My stomach turned. What had my grandmother been doing down here? On a workbench, I found her journal. The pages were filled with botanical sketches, but the plants had aspects. A root system that looked like a nervous system. A flower with petals resembling a gaping mouth. The notes were in her tight script. The soil here is receptive. One entry read. The lineage must be fed. The roots remember. The portrait holds the pattern. My blood went cold. The portrait. I ran back upstairs. The journal clutched in my hand. Dawn was breaking, casting a sickly gray light through the windows. I stood before the portrait, really looking at it for the first time. Their eyes, they weren't looking at the painter. My great-grandmother's gaze was fixed on my grandmother. My grandmother's on my mother. And my mother's eyes, they were looking directly at the spot where I, the blurry child, would be standing. A perfect, unnatural line of sight. A lineage of observation. A wave of dizziness hit me. I stumbled to the window, needing air, needing to see the normal world outside. I saw my pale reflection in the glass, and I watched, paralyzed, as my reflection slowly raised a hand and placed it against the glass. My own hands were at my sides. I was not moving. My reflection smiled, a slow, grim imitation of my grandmother's smile in the portrait. I broke. Whatever rational part of my mind was left screamed at me to get out. I threw my things into my bag. The whispering was a constant now, not in my ears, but in the walls, in the floorboards. Ava, it seemed to sigh. The roots are deep. The pattern is not complete. I felt a terrible, pulling sensation, not on my body, but on myself, like something was trying to anchor me to the floor, to the very soil beneath the house. I took the stairs 2 at a time. As I passed the other paintings' landscapes, still, life's eye saw them shift in my peripheral vision. The trees in a forest. I yanked the front door open. Morning light, real and blinding, flooded in. I didn't look back. I ran to my car, threw the bag in, and peeled out down the driveway, gravel spraying. Only when I was back on the highway, my hands shaking on the wheel, did I allow myself one glance in the rearview mirror. The house was just a speck. I was free. I had escaped. I let out a sob of relief. I'd done it. I'd faced it, and I'd gotten out. That was 6 months ago. I sold the house immediately. I am seeing a new therapist. I am doing better. I really am. I am back in the city, surrounded by noise and people. I never hear whispers anymore. I don't see things in reflections. I am moving on. But sometimes, in quiet moments, I feel a faint, familiar pull, a rooting, and I have this new appreciation for family heirlooms. I keep looking at the small, innocent painting my grandmother gave me for my 10th birthday. The one hanging in my apartment now. The colors in it seem to shift sometimes when I am not looking. I tell myself it's just the light, a pattern in the brush strokes, nothing more. After all, the roots of a family tree run very, very deep. Thanks for listening to my story. If you felt that chill down your spine, you know what to smash that like button and subscribe for more tales from the shadows. Tell me in the comments what you think was in those jars. And remember, sometimes an inheritance isn't a gift. It's a binding contract. I used to think the worst part of the night shift was the boredom. I was wrong. The worst part is the silence, not the quiet of an empty building, but the kind of silence that feels like a held breath. My name is Marcus, and for 6 months, I was the overnight security monitor for the old, mostly vacant Crestwood apartments. It was a simple job. Watch the screens, do a patrol every 2 hours, and mostly just stay awake. The pay was decent, and the solitude was a bonus for a guy who'd recently gone through a rough patch. But the building it had a history, a few unexplained suicides decades ago. Whispers of a reclusive tenant who practiced strange rituals. I dismissed it as urban legend, the kind of story that gets attached to any old structure. But the building remembered, and in the silence, it started to speak. The Crestwood was a relic, 12 stories of fading Art Deco elegance, now home to a handful of elderly tenants and a lot of dust. My post was a cramped office off the main lobby, a cave of humming electronics and stale coffee. The rule was simple: never leave the desk unmanned. The patrols were quick, in and out affairs. I'd take the elevator to the top, walk the empty halls, check the fire exits, and come back down. It was during my 3rd week that I noticed the first anomaly. On monitor 7, which covered the long 6th floor hallway, a motion sensor light would flick on at exactly 3:17 a.m. Every night. The hallway was supposed to be vacant. Last tenant on that floor had moved out months prior. I mentioned it to Frank, the daytime guy. He just grunted. Old wiring. That hole floor's amiss. The light's probably shorting. Comes on when the building's power load shifts. Don't worry about it. It made sense. But sense has a way of evaporating in the dead of night. I started watching that screen more than the others. The light would pop on, and then, a few minutes later, it would click off. It was rhythmic, almost deliberate. Then one Tuesday, it didn't turn off. It stayed on until sunrise. What do you guys think? Ever had something in your house a creak? A flickering light that has a little too much of a schedule. My patrols on the 6th floor became tense. The air was colder there, a dry bone chill that the building's wheezing heater couldn't touch. The silence was different too, not just an absence of sound, but a suppression of it. My footsteps on the vintage carpet felt muffled, like the hallway itself was absorbing the noise. It'd do my check, my skin prickling, feeling the weight of all those empty, locked apartments around me. It'd always hurry back to the elevator, the ding of its arrival sounding ob. The anomalies escalated. It was subtle things at first. A potted plant in the lobby would be facing a different direction after my round. The ancient elevator would sometimes stop on the 6th floor when no one had called it. Then on the cameras, I started seeing shadows that didn't match up. On the monitor for the 6th floor, a long, thin shadow would stretch across the wall. But there was nothing in the hallway to cast it. It would appear for a few seconds, then vanish when the motion light timed out. I began logging it in the official report, but my entries were always gone the next morning, replaced by Frank's scrawl. All secure. No incidents. The figure appeared on a Sunday, 3:17 a.m. Monitor 7. The light flicked on, and there she was, a woman or the shape of one, in a long, old-fashioned dress, standing at the very end of the hall by the window. She was pale, indistinct, like a smudge on the camera lens. But she was there. I lunged for the radio to call it in, my heart hammering against my ribs. When I looked back, she was gone. The light was off. I spent the next hour replaying the digital recording. The timestamp showed the light coming on, the empty hallway, and then the recording skipped. 2 minutes were just missing. That was the moment my curiosity hardened into real, cold fear. I couldn't leave it alone. I had to know. The next night, during my patrol, I broke the cardinal rule. I stood in front of apartment 607, the one id felt watched from. The master key felt heavy in my hand. This was immediate termination if I was caught. But the silence was screaming at me. I turned the key. The lock clicked with a sound that echoed way too much down that silent hall. I pushed the door open. It was utterly, completely empty. No furniture, no curtains. just dust motes dancing in the beam of my flashlight. And it was cold, so cold. Disappointment and relief washed over me. Just an old, empty room. I was about to leave when my flashlight beam passed over the center of the living room. The dust in the air, it swirled, not randomly, but in a perfect, contained vortex, like something had just passed through it. Then I felt it, a pressure chain. The air grew denser, colder, and then a sound, not in my ears, but inside my head. A low, rhythmic shush, 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 like fabric brushing slowly against a wall. I backed out, slammed the door, and sprinted for the elevator. I didn't breathe until I was back at my desk. The lobby lights feeling pathetically bright and false. She was everywhere after that, not just on the 6th floor, on the feed from the basement laundry, in the reflection of the lobby's polished brass mailboxes, standing on the rooftop, always the same pale smudge, the same long dress, and she was getting clearer. I could make out the suggestion of dark hair, the hollows where eyes should be. The silence in the building became absolute. The usual settling groans, the hum of the fridge in the break roomthy, all stopped. It was a vacuum. The only sound was that internal shush, shush, shush that started up whenever I was alone. I stopped sleeping. I'd just stare at the screens, waiting. The climax came on my last night. I'd put in my notice. I was done. Just one more shift. I was determined to just keep my head down, watch the clock, and leave at sunrise. At 3 a.m., all the monitors went black. Not off black, as if every camera was covered. Then, one by one, they fizzed back to life, and every single view was of the inside of apartment 607, from impossible angles, as if cameras were mounted in the walls. The empty room, then the main power cut. Emergency. Lights bathed the lobby in an eerie red glow. And I heard it, not in my head this time, but with my ears. The slow, dragging shush, shush, shush of fabric on carpet, coming from the dark hallway leading to the offices. She was in the doorway. I knew her name then, as clearly as if Shed spoken it. Alina, who had lived and died in 607 60 years ago. She wasn't a ghost in the storybook sense. She was a stain, a repeating moment of profound silence and despair that the building had absorbed. She didn't want to hurt me. She wanted me to be quiet, to be still, to join the silence. Her presence wasn't an attack. It was an invitation to stop, to cease. The shush was her lullaby. The cold was the absence of all life. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I could only watch as she glided closer, that hollow gaze pulling at me, promising an end to all sound, all worry, all thought. Her hand, cold as forgotten stone, brushed my forehead, and in that touch, I didn't see her death. I felt her loneliness. A silence so completed was a physical weight, a vacuum that had sucked in every hope, every connection, every sound of her own existence. She was offering it to me, a part of me, so tired from the fear and the sleepless nights, wanted to accept, to just be quiet, but a deeper, animal part fought back, with a gasp that tore through the silent pressure. I stumbled back, knocking over my chair. The crash was deafening, and she flinched. The sound, sudden, chaotic, living sound disrupted her. She fragmented, like a reflection in shattered glass, and was gone. I didn't grab my coat. I didn't shut down the system. I ran. I blasted through the front doors and didn't stop running until I was 3 blocks away, gulping in the cold, noisy, beautiful air filled with distant traffic and the hum of the city. I never went back. I left my final paycheck, my stuff in my locker, everything. I changed my number. I told my boss I was sick, and then I ghosted the whole company. For months, I slept with the lights on and a talk radio playing. The world was blessedly, wonderfully loud. I got a new job, a daytime IT help desk job in a bright, open-plan office. I moved to a new building, a modern complex with thin walls and noisy neighbors. I thought I was safe. I thought id left it behind. But silence finds you in the pause between songs on your playlist, in the dead of night, when the apartment building finally sleeps. That's when I feel the temperature drop, just a degree. That's when I see a shadow in my hallway that doesn't quite match the furniture. The silence isn't empty anymore. It's watchful. Last week, I saw a news article. The Crestwood apartments are being demolished. They're digging up the foundation. A part of me felt relief. Maybe they'd break whatever anchor held Alina there. But another part, a part that feels that familiar chill, wondered, where does a silence go when its home is destroyed? Does it dissipate? Or does it go looking for a new place to settle? Somewhere familiar. Somewhere it's already been invited. The noises in my new building have started to change. The couple upstairs, who used to argue every Thursday, have been quiet for weeks. The hallway outside my door, usually echoing with footsteps, now has long stretches of perfect stillness. And last night, at exactly 3:17 a.m., my Bluetooth speaker, which was turned off, emitted a single, soft burst of static in the shape of a sigh. She doesn't need an old building. She just needs the quiet. And I made the mistake of listening. So, if you're watching this, and you feel a sudden, unexplainable quiet settle over your home, if the sounds of life seem to hush all at once, make a noise, slam a door turn on the TV. Fight the silence with everything you have, because once it really listens to you, it learns what quiet you crave, and it's a very quick learner. Thanks for watching. If you have your own story of an unexplained silence, let me know in the comments below. Maybe we can compare notes. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales from the shadows. And remember, keep the volume up. I shouldn't have taken the shortcut. That's the thought that plays on a loop in my head now. My name is Ava, and this is what my headlights caught on Highway 17 that night. It was supposed to be a simple drive from my grandfather's funeral back to the city. A trip I'd made a dozen times, but I was tired, grieving, and my GPS suggested a route that would shave 45 minutes off the trip. A more efficient path, it said. So I turned off the main interstate and onto a 2-lane road that cut through the deep woods of the national forest. The change was immediate. The comforting glow of gas stations and roadside diners vanished, replaced by an unbroken wall of pines. My phone's signal dropped to 1 bar, then to nothing. The rain, which had been a gentle patter, intensified, drumming on the roof of my sedan. The only sound was the swish of the wipers and the hum of the engine. I remember feeling a prickle on the back of my neck, a primal signal I foolishly ignored. I just cranked the heat and told myself I'd be back on the interstate in 30 miles. That's when I first saw it. Not a thing, but an absence. In my rearview mirror, my tail lights illuminated nothing. No road, no lines. Just a void of black that seemed to swallow the light whole. I shook my head, blaming it on the rain and my tired eyes. But have you ever had that feeling? Like the darkness behind you is somehow thicker than the darkness ahead. I tightened my grip on the wheel. The first figure appeared 10 minutes later. Just a dark, upright shape on the shoulder, facing the trees. My headlights swept over it for a moment. A man in a dark coat, I thought. Not unusual. A broken down car maybe. But he didn't turn. He didn't react to the light or the sound of my car. He just stood there. I drove past, my eyes darting back to the mirror. He was gone, swallowed by the dark. Weird, I muttered to the empty car. 2 miles later, I saw another. Same dark coat, same rigid posture. This one was closer to the road, on the left shoulder, and its head was tilted, like it was listening to the trees. A cold knot formed in my stomach. No car, no reason to be there. Just a person standing in the pouring rain, in the middle of nowhere, in the dead of night. I pressed the accelerator, my heart thumping against my ribs. When the third one appeared, it was in the middle of my lane. I slammed on the brakes, the tires hydroplaning for a terrifying second. The figure didn't flinch. It stood squarely in the road, facing me. I could make out no features, just a human-shaped cutout of deeper night. My hand hovered over the horn, but something stopped me. A deep, instinctual warning. Don't acknowledge it. Don't signal it. I swerved into the empty oncoming lane and sped past. So close, I could have touched it. I didn't look back. Okay, Ava, get it together, I breathed, my voice trembling. It's just some creepy locals. Ure almost through. I glanced at my GPS. The screen flickered. The friendly blue line of my route was gone. In its place was a mess of green static, and the estimated arrival time now read AM. Panic, sharp and acidic, rose in my throat. I was lost, completely, utterly lost in a sea of trees and rain and those things. I drove for what felt like hours, the fuel gauge dipping toward empty, when I saw the old gas station. A surge of relief nearly made me cry. It was closed, clearly abandoned for years, but it was a landmark, something human. I pulled off the highway, my tires crunching on broken asphalt, and stopped under the flickering glow of a lone security light. The rain had slowed to a drizzle. For the first time since seeing the figures, I felt a sliver of safety. False safety. I decided to call for help, using the last of my phone's battery to try and send a location pin to my sister. As the screen struggled to find a signal, I looked up through my rear window, back toward the highway. My blood turned to ice. They were there, not one or two, lining both sides of the road, as far as I could see in the dim light, perfectly still, all facing the gas station, facing me, a silent, waiting audience. What would you have done in that moment? I did something worse. I got out of the car. I don't know why I did it. Maybe to prove they were real. Maybe to scream at them, to leave me alone. The cool, damp air hit my face as I stepped out. The only sound was the creak of the old sign swinging in the wind. I took one step, then two, toward the edge of the lot. None of the figures moved. They were like statues. What do you want? I shouted, my voice small and swallowed by the vast dark. As if in answer, every single one of them, in perfect unison, tilted their heads, the same unnatural, listening angle. The one closest to me, the one who had been in the road, took a step forward, then another. It didn't walk so much as advance. The flickering light from the gas station finally caught its face. There were no eyes, no nose, just a smooth, featureless plane where a face should be, with a dark, gaping hole of a mouth stretched open in a silent scream. It was the absolute wrongness of it, the void where humanity should be. That broke the last of my courage. I stumbled backward, fumbling for my car door. I screeched out of that lot, not caring about direction, just needing to be away. I drove until the sun began to bleed a sickly gray light into the sky, and I finally found an on-ramp to the interstate. I never reported it. What would I say? I sat in a busy diner, shaking, surrounded by the comforting sounds of normal life. I told myself it was over. I was safe. But sometimes, late at night, when I am driving, I'll catch a shape in the corner of my eye on a lonely stretch of road. I'll see a dark figure standing too still in a distant field, and I have to check my mirrors, not to see what's behind me, but to make sure the road behind me is still there at all. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever seen something on a dark road you can't explain, let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more true horror stories. Stay safe out there. I moved into the remote area for the silence. That was my first mistake. My name is Ava, and after a year of city noise and a brutal breakup, I craved absolute quiet. The listing promised a tech detox retreat, a minimalist cabin in the pine forests north of the Oregon border. No neighbors for 5 miles. I brought my laptop. Of course, some habits die hardened. My 4 wireless security cameras. A woman traveling alone can't be too careful, right? I set them up on the first day. One on the front porch, one facing the tree line out back, one in the living room, and one in the hallway pointing at the bedroom door. A digital security blanket. I remember laughing at myself as I plugged them in, their tiny red LEDs glowing in the dimming light. What was I so afraid of out here? My own thoughts. The first 2 nights were blissfully, profoundly quiet. Just the wind in the pines and the crackle of the fireplace. I'd check the camera app on my phone before bed, seeing nothing but still frames of peaceful darkness. On the 3rd night, I was working late, editing a video project. A storm was rolling in, and the wind had picked up, howling around the corners of the cabin. I got up to make tea, and on a whim, I opened the app. The 4 squares were normal, except for the feed from the backyard. For just a second, I thought it was a trick of the moonlight through the swaying trees. But no, there was a figure, a tall, starkly pale figure, standing perfectly still at the exact edge of the tree line, facing the camera. My blood went cold. It was too tall, too thin to be a person. The proportions were off. Its head was slightly tilted, as if studying the little camera lens. I stared, my tea forgotten, waiting for it to move. It didn't. For 10 minutes, it just stood there. Then the feed glitched. The image pixelated, scrambled into static for 3 seconds. And when it cleared, the figure was gone. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. A glitch. It had to be. The storm was interfering with the signal. Maybe it was a weird tree. Stump my mind had morphed into something else. I forced myself to believe that. But tell me, what would you have done? Would you have shrugged it off? Or would you have done what I did next? I spent the night with every light in the cabin on, my phone in my hand, refreshing the camera app every 30 seconds. By dawn, exhaustion had almost convinced me id imagined it. I spent the next day jumpy, analyzing every creak of the cabin. I told myself it was a one-time thing, a digital ghost. That evening, I deliberately didn't open the app. I read a book, watched a movie, tried to act normal. But at 11 p.m., my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the porch camera. My heart hammered against my ribs. I opened the alert. The video clip was 5 seconds long. It showed my empty porch, but in the middle of the frame, clear as day, was a single footprint, a bare footprint caked in dark mud. It hadn't been there when id last checked. The motion sensor hadn't captured anyone walking up to make it, or walking away. It had just appeared. I played it over and over. The footprint was long, too long, with toes that seemed just slightly too articulated. I ran to the front door, deadbolted it, and backed away. That's when I heard the first tap. A soft, deliberate tap, tap, tap on the living room window. I froze. The rational part of my brain screamed branch. But the storm had passed. The night was still. It came again, from a different window across the room. Then another from the kitchen. It was circling the house. I fumbled with my phone, pulling up the live feed from the living room camera, which had a wide angle of the main space. The room was empty, but on the feed, I could see the window, and I could see the pale, blurred shape of a face pressed against the glass, looking in. A face that was not visible when I turned my own head to look. It was only visible through the camera. In reality, the window was dark. On the screen, it was watching me. A silent sob caught in my throat. This thing wasn't just outside. It existed in the space between reality and the digital eye. It was using my own security, my own paranoia, to see me. I watched, paralyzed, as on the phone screen, the figure outside slowly raised one of those long-fingered hands and pointed, not at the room. It pointed directly at the camera, at me watching. Then the feed from the living room camera died. The little square on my app went black. One by one, the cameras went offline. The backyard feed died. Then the hallway, each time a second before it cut out. I'd see a flash of that pale, distorted shape filling the frame. It was disabling my eyes. It was coming inside. The only feed left was the porch camera. I crouched behind the sofa, watching it like a lifeline. The porch was empty. Maybe it was over. Maybe disabling the cameras was enough for it. I dared to hope. That was my second mistake. The porch camera feed suddenly glitched. The image didn't go black. Instead, it twisted. The wooden planks of the porch stretched and warped like taffy. The colors inverting into a negative smear. And from this digital meltdown, the figure stepped. It didn't walk into frame from the edges. It resolved in the center of the screen, piecing itself together from the static and glitch artifacts. It was now inside the feed's reality, and my front door was just beyond the camera's view. I heard the deadbolt turn. Not a smash, not a break-in. A soft, precise click of the metal bolt sliding back on its own. The front door swung open silently. No one was there, but I heard the wet squelch of mud on the hardwood floor. One step, then another. A trail of those long, grotesque footprints appeared, materializing step by step, leading from the doorway right into the middle of my living room. They stopped. The air grew thick and cold, and a low, digital hum filled my ears like a corrupted audio file. It was in the room with me. I could feel its attention. A static electricity prickle on my skin. It wasn't looking at the sofa. It was looking at the space behind my eyes, at the fear itself. My phone, still clutched in my hand, lit up. The app was open, showing a single active feed. It was a feed I never set up. A fifth camera. The image was a close-up of my own terrified face, filmed from somewhere just in front of me. I was looking into the lens of my own doom, and in the reflection on the dark glass of that lens, I saw it standing right behind me. Its head was bent down, leaning over my shoulder, staring at my reflection, staring back at it. I didn't scream. I couldn't. The world dissolved into a scream of television, static in my mind. I woke up on the living room floor at dawn. The door was closed and locked. The muddy footprints were gone. Every light in the house was off. My phone was beside me, the battery dead. It was all so normal, it was sickening. I charged the phone, packed my car with shaking hands, and fled. I never contacted the host. What would I say? I drove until I found a cell signal and called a friend, babbling about a bad trip, needing to crash. She didn't ask questions. I stayed with her for a week, jumping at every notification sound. Eventually, I formatted my phone, deleted the camera app, tried to bury the memory. But sometimes, late at night, my phone will buzz with a notification from an app I don't remember installing, and it'll see a single live feed. It's a view of whatever room I am in, and it's always filmed from an angle just behind my shoulder. Thanks for listening. If you have a similar story, tell tell me in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales from the edge of the unknown. Stay safe out there, and maybe think twice before you plug in those cameras. I used to believe that the past was just a story, something you could close the book on. That was before I spent a week alone in my grandfather's hunting cabin, the place he left to me in his will. My name is Rachel. I am a freelance graphic designer, and I thought this would be the perfect quiet getaway to meet a deadline. The cabin was exactly as I remembered from childhood visits. All dark wood, mothball-scented blankets, and that pervasive chill that even a roaring fire can't fully chase away. I noticed two things right away that first evening. First, all the mirrors were turned to face the walls. And second, carved into the doorframe of the bedroom, at about the height of a child's hand, was a single word: listen. The first night was quiet, just the groaning of old timbers and the wind in the pines. I worked late, the silence feeling more productive than creepy. But around 2 a.m., I heard it. Not a creak or a groan, but a sound like whispering. It was faint, layered, like several people talking quietly just below the threshold of understanding. It seemed to be coming from the stone fireplace. I told myself it was the wind channeling down the chimney, some weird acoustic trick of the old cabin. I went to bed, pulling the covers over my head like a kid. So tell me in the comments, what's the weirdest sound you've ever heard in your house when you were alone? The next day, determined not to be spooked by old pipes, I decided to clean. In the smallest bedroom, I found a loose floorboard. Under it was a journal, my grandfather's. The entries weren't about hunting trips or the weather. They were procedures. Rule 1: salt line at every threshold before sundown. Rule 2: never acknowledge the whispers from the chimney. Rule 3: if the reflections start moving on their own, leave before dark. My blood ran cold. He'd written these like someone documenting a dangerous but necessary routine, like maintaining a furnace that might explode. The last entry, dated the week before he died, just said, "It's getting stronger. Rachel is the only one left who might understand. I am so sorry." That's when the active phenomena started. Small things. It'd leave a coffee mug on the table and find it an hour later, placed precisely in the center of the kitchen floor. The temperature would plummet in one corner of a room, and once I found all the dry rice in the pantry spilled into a frying pan, arranged in a complex, swirling spiral. It wasn't threatening, but it was intelligent. It was showing off. I should have left. I know that now, but a stupid, morbid curiosity had me. This was my inheritance. Not just the cabin, but whatever lived in it with him. I broke a rule. I turned one of the mirrors around a small, tarnished hand mirror from my grandmother's dresser. For a moment, I just saw my own pale, tired face. Then, in the reflection, I saw him. Standing in the corner behind me was a man. He was tall, dressed in what looked like old work clothes, but his features were blurred, like a smudged photograph. He didn't move. He just watched my reflection. I spun around. The corner was empty. I looked back in the mirror. He was still there, but now his head was tilted, as if curious. I threw the mirror into the fireplace and heard the glass crack, not from heat, but as if something had shattered it from within. That night, the whispers became voices, clear, overlapping voices emanating from the fireplace. They weren't speaking English. It was a low, guttural language that felt wrong in my ears. I barricaded myself in the bedroom. My grandfather's journal, my only guide. He wrote about a pressure, an ancient, hungry thing that lived in the land, that his own father had accidentally bound to the cabin through some forgotten ritual. It fed on attention, on fear. The rules were containment, a desperate ceasefire. I was sobbing, praying for dawn. Then I saw it, seeping under the bedroom door wasn't water. It was a pool of utter blackness, thick like oil, and it was spreading across the floor towards the bed. It smelled of wet earth and decay. I remembered the salt. I scrambled off the bed, jumping over the advancing blackness, and grabbed the box of salt from my groceries. My hands shook so badly, I spilled half of it. As I poured a ragged line across the doorway, the black liquid recoiled. From the hall shadows, the figure from the mirror emerged. It wasn't a ghost. It was a hole in the world, a silhouette of static and cold that pulled the light and warmth from the air. It reached a hand of fragmented darkness towards the salt line. The grains where it pointed began to turn gray and crumble. It was learning. It was breaking the rules. I don't know what made it stop. Maybe the first rays of dawn through the window. Maybe id fed it enough terror for one night. The shadow dissolved. The blackness receded under the door. I didn't pack. I just ran to my car and drove, sobbing with relief as the cabin vanished in my rear view. I was free. I got all the way to the motel on the highway, my heart finally slowing. I called a friend, my voice shaky but laughing, saying id had a creepy time, but was okay. That's when I caught a movement in the dark reflection of my motel room window. I turned on the lamp. The room was empty, but when I looked back at the black window, I saw the reflection wasn't empty anymore. He was there, sitting in the reflection of the armchair. He had followed me. He was in the reflection, and reflections are everywhere. In windows, in screens, in the back of a spoon. I think my grandfather's journal had it wrong. The rules weren't for containment. They were an offering, a way to keep it fed and happy in one place. And I had taken its home away. So now it's staying with me. If you look away from your screen right now, into the dark corner of your room, just be sure you only see what you're supposed to see. Thank you for listening to my story. If you felt that chill, you know this is a channel that understands real horror. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss our next journey into the dark. I made a promise to myself after what happened on Highway 17. I will never, ever drive that road after dark again. And if you've ever felt that cold, primal dread of being utterly alone in the middle of nowhere, you'll understand why. My name is Lee. It was supposed to be a simple trip, a 6-hour drive from the city to my cousin's wedding up north. It'd taken Highway 17 a dozen times, always in daylight. It's a beautiful, winding road through the mountains, all dense pine forests and dramatic cliffs. But that night, leaving late after work, the beauty was swallowed by an impenetrable black. The first few hours were fine. Podcasts, coffee, the rhythmic hum of the tires. But as the last town faded in my rear view, the silence began to feel thick. My phone signal dropped to 1 bar, then vanished. No big deal, I thought. I had the route memorized. That's when I noticed the headlights, far behind me, but persistent. They kept a steady distance for maybe 20 minutes. It'd speed up a little, they'd match me. It'd slow down, they'd slow down. A coincidence, probably. Just another late-night driver. I turned up the music, trying to drown out my own nervous thoughts. "You're being paranoid, Lee," I said out loud. The voice in my head wasn't convinced. I passed the no services sign, a little stone of dread dropping into my stomach. That's when the fog started. It wasn't weather fog. It was low, clinging to the road itself, pale and cold-looking, pooling in the dips and curves. And my followers, headlights they changed. They grew brighter, harsher, almost a piercing blue-white, instead of standard halogen yellow. They were right on my tail now. I could see the outline of the vehicle, a big, boxy truck, or an old Sioux V-butt. The glare was so intense it washed out any details. I hit a straightaway and floored it. My little sedan protested, but it shot forward. The truck didn't speed up. It just kept its exact distance, as if it was tethered to my bumper by an invisible rope. My heart was a frantic bird in my chest. Okay, have any of you ever had a real, genuine panic attack while alone? That feeling of your own breath turning against you. And then my car sputtered. A horrible, choking sound from the engine. The check engine light blazed to life like a tiny, angry sun on my dashboard. The car lost power, coasting to a shuddering stop on the narrow shoulder. I slammed my hands on the wheel. No, 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 no. I looked in the mirror. The truck had also stopped, about 50 yards back, its engine cut off. Total silence, except for the ticking of my cooling engine and the thrum of my own blood in my ears. Two figures sat silhouetted in its cab. They didn't move. I fumbled for my phone. No signal. Of course, I had a choice. Stay in the car, a metal coffin on the side of the road, or make a run for it. The trees were a wall of blackness. I couldn't see the truck's occupants get out, but I saw its driver's side door swing open. A tall, lean figure stepped onto the asphalt. I assumed it was a Hedgest stood there, facing me. I locked my doors. The sound was deafeningly loud. He started walking. Not a normal walk. A slow, deliberate, almost mechanical stride. One step. My breath fogged the window. He got closer. I could make out a dark jacket, jeans. But his face, the headlights from his truck, were behind him, casting his features into total shadow. Just a dark oval under a cap. He stopped beside my passenger door. He didn't try the handle. He didn't bend down to look in. He just stood there. I held my breath. A full minute passed. Then he raised a hand and placed his palm flat against the window. It wasn't the gesture that froze the air in my lungs. It was the hand. The skin was stark white, almost gray, and it looked wrong, like it wasn't real skin at all. And it was cold. I saw the condensation from my own breath. On the inside of the glass, frost over where his palm touched. Actual frost, forming intricate, feathery patterns. Then he leaned in. His face came close to the glass, but the shadow remained, a perfect void. A low sound seeped through the metal and glass. Not a voice, a staticky, whispering rush, like a radio tuned between stations. But underneath it, I heard my name. I screamed. I scrambled over the center console, falling into the back seat. I curled into a ball on the floor, squeezing my eyes shut. This isn't happening. This isn't happening. The staticky whisper stopped. I heard footsteps on gravel, moving away. A car door slammed. An engine started. I dared to peek over the seat. The truck's headlights wheeled around, pointing back the way we came. It drove off, its red taillights dissolving into the fog. I was alone. I sobbed with relief, a harsh, ugly sound. False safety is a cruel trick. I actually thought, for a glorious, stupid moment, that it was over, that he'd gotten bored, given up. I waited 10 minutes, maybe 20, shaking on the floor of my car. The silence felt heavier than before. I needed to get out, to see if I could fix the engine. or at least put up my hood as a signal. I carefully uncurled and reached up to the driver's side door handle. My fingers were inches from it when it moved. Not a jiggle, a slow, complete downward arc. The door unlocked itself. I stared, my brain refusing to process it. I hadn't touched it. The central locks were manual. I watched, paralyzed, as the handle began to turn again. This time to open the door. I threw myself backward, just as the door swung open. The dome light flickered on for a split second, then died with a pop. In that brief flash, I saw him. He was crouched right there, his void face tilted, one of those waxy white hands gripping the door frame. He never left. He just parked his truck out of sight and come back on foot. The static whisper filled the car, a torrent of nonsense syllables that drilled into my skull. I kicked out wildly, my foot connecting with something solid but unyielding, like kicking a frozen tree trunk. I scrambled out the opposite door, tumbling onto the cold, gritty asphalt of the highway. I ran. I didn't think about the trees, the dark, the animals. The road was the only path I knew. My lungs burned. I could hear no footsteps behind me, but I felt a pressure, a cold spot following me like a draft. I glanced back once. My car was a dark lump, and standing beside it, watching me run, was the tall man. He wasn't chasing. He was just observing. Then ahead of me, a light. Not headlights. A soft, warm, golden glow coming from the trees to my right. A house. A cabin. I didn't hesitate. I crashed through the undergrowth, branches whipping my face toward that light. It was an old hunter's cabin, looking abandoned, except for that one lit window and the smoke. I stumbled onto the porch and pounded on the door. Please help me. The door was unlocked. It swung inward. The cabin was one room, furnished with a cot, a wood stove, and a table. It was empty, but on the table, under the glow of an oil lamp, was a notebook, and on the open page, in frantic handwriting, it read, "The man on THE highway. He lures you with the light. Do not stay. He is coming." My blood turned to ice. I heard the porch board creak. I turned. Through the small window in the door, I saw the void of his face, backlit now by the moon. He was right there. He placed his palm against the glass. The frost began to spiderweb. The static whisper filled the cabin, coming from the very walls. I blew out the lamp. In the sudden, absolute darkness, I felt his cold presence seep through the door. I don't know how I got out. I remember the taste of pine needles and blood, running until my legs gave way. A park ranger found me at dawn, hypothermic and babbling. 3 miles down the highway. They never found my car. They never found the cabin. They said it was shock, a hallucination brought on by stress and the cold. But I know what I saw. I know what followed me. And sometimes, when I am driving on any dark road now, I'll see a pair of headlights in my mirror that are just a little too bright, a little too white. And I know my promise won't keep me safe forever, because he doesn't just haunt Highway 17. He haunts the loneliness. He's out there right now, waiting for someone else to break down, all alone in the dark. Thank you for listening to my story. If you felt that chill, that sense of being watched, you're not alone. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more true horror stories. And in the comments, tell me what's the most isolated, lonely road you've ever had to drive.